Hello, I'm Vita Thomas. I'm a partner with Oppenheimer Investigations Group based in Berkeley, although I am based in Sacramento, California. And I'm delighted that you'll be joining me today for a 1 hour presentation on understanding and addressing unconscious bias at work. I've been practicing employment law for about 27 years, mostly for defense in the first half of my career. And then for about 20 years, I've spent time doing impartial investigations, training, including on this particular topic, as well as diversity and inclusion and conflict resolution. And the topic of unconscious bias is one that I've studied for a great deal of my career. It's a topic I love to present on because it is so much about nuance. It's also about encouraging you, the individual, to really be open-minded and honest about yourself with a desire to learn more about what unconscious biases you might have, how they might be impacting the way you interact with individuals, including at work, and also understanding that just because you have unconscious or inherent bias does not mean that you cannot reduce those biases, does not mean that you have to be ruled by them. And so we'll have that conversation for the next hour. Today, we're going to cover a number of topics regarding unconscious bias, definitions about what is unconscious biases, implicit biases, stereotypes, other types of cognitive bias. We will talk about how biases impact our decisions and our interactions, the harmful impact of microaggressions, a topic that you may have been hearing a lot about, especially in the last year or so. And I think it's important to discuss what exactly are microaggressions, how can you recognize them, how do you know if you're doing them, and if so, how can you address that behavior so that you're not unintentionally harming those that you work with. And most importantly, we are going to talk about how to eliminate or reduce unconscious bias. The good news is that having an unconscious bias doesn't mean that you have to act upon it. There are things that you can do to reduce it. I always like to start this presentation by asking folks who wants to be unfair. And if I were doing this training in person, which I did before March of 2020 and the shelter in place ordinances from COVID, in person training, I would ask folks, to raise their hands if they wanted to be unfair. And it wouldn't surprise you to know that no one raises their hand because no one wants to be unfair. We all start from the premise that, of course, we want to be fair with individuals. However, there are powers at work, forces at work that can interfere with our ability to be fair. We make hundreds of decisions every day. We like to think that they're not impacted by bias, but they are. Biases can impact the way that we make decisions, the information that we take in. Okay. So it's important to know that biases can impact us. They're invisible, unconscious forces that can impact how we make decisions and how we see the world. You might be wondering, what is Vita talking about? What are these biases? And it's true that there are a lot of different definitions you could use when you're talking about bias or unconscious bias, which is the topic today. Sometimes it's based on a preference. Unconscious biases can spring from stereotypes. They can be based in part in reality, but sometimes biases and stereotypes are not based on reality. So for example, many of us have a favorite, let's say a favorite color. If you have a favorite color, does that mean you're biased? Well, it can be a preference, but that's not what I'm talking about, because a favorite color is a benign preference that does not ordinarily have the potential to impact individuals. The unconscious biases that I'm talking about are something more serious and that can have a more negative impact on individuals. It's important to know that biases come from somewhere, right? They are in large part due to the way that our brains are wired. And then when you combine our brain wiring with our environment, lo and behold, it's not very long before biases do start to impact us. They can come from stereotypes from the media. And now I have to include social media, which is such a large part